Hey there, SES students. I'm Jessie Cayley. I work for the City of Eagan. I'm their Water Resources Specialist. The last time you saw me, I was out on Carlson Lake in the canoe, and this time I'm going to talk to you from the home office about your pond projects. And for your group specifically, we're going to talk about plants, nitrogen, and phosphorus. In Eagan, like many other urban or suburban cities, you will find that there are challenges with keeping lakes healthy. And the main challenge of that is stormwater. Anytime it rains or snows or melts, then all of that runoff gets funneled into the surface water. And the challenge that we have is to try and keep the stormwater cleaner so that we can keep the lakes protected and then clean up the lakes themselves. The main thing that I want you to remember is that how you use the land really directly affects the quality of the water, both surface water and groundwater. And today I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and then I'm going to talk specifically about your lake's data that you're looking at and give you some other resources as well. So here again is this phrase that land use drives water quality. Within the watershed, if you have more people living there, it tends to mean that there is more infrastructure like buildings and roads, which tends to lead to more storm runoff and also more polluted storm runoff, and it does create worse water quality in general. You can see that in Eagan, for example, between 1950 and 2020, the population has changed dramatically. You can see a picture down below there of how Fitz Lake looked in 1990. Even then, there were far fewer houses and smaller roads and things like that. And then in 2019, it's pretty much mostly houses and roads with some green space scattered in there, but it's quite a bit different. You can imagine how much that's affected how when it rains, that storm water is running off of an impervious surface instead of soaking into the ground. Here's just one more illustration of how water can soak into the ground versus running off on an impervious surface. In a natural state like a grassland or a forest, you might get most of the water soaking in, half the water soaking in, the other half being evapotranspirated by the plants, versus in a city setting, you get quite a bit of runoff and much less infiltration because of all the impervious cover. In Eagan, there are a couple different things that we do. We try to clean up that stormwater before it goes into the lakes. We try and reduce the amount of stormwater before it runs in. And then we also try to improve the lakes themselves. So we can filter stormwater. We can slow it down by putting it into storm ponds first, or a chain of ponds before it goes into a major lake. We can make sure that not very much soil runs off of a landscape, especially when it's under development. We call that erosion control. We can soak in stormwater in things like rain gardens and other infiltration areas. We can clean up the impervious surfaces themselves, like parking lots, and we can send out the street sweeper, and we can make sure that people don't spill all over the place. We can get volunteers to help clean up, and we can require all these things to happen so that we're sure that there's no big polluters out there. We can also do things to the lakes themselves, like applying alum. I'll talk about that in a minute. Trying to maintain a healthy balance of plants, and also trying to maintain healthy balance of fish populations. If you have a whole pond that's full of only bullheads, they're going to stir it up and try and find food, and bluegills or fathead minnows, if they are stunted populations or there's just a lot of them, they can have the same effect. Versus if you have a lot of predator fish sort of keeping those smaller fish in control, then it's not so bad. Here's some pictures I just wanted to show you of an iron sand filter. This is one way that we can filter stormwater and actually draw the phosphorus out of it. It's like soaking stormwater slowly through a sandbar with iron filings mixed in, and that reduces phosphorus. We can slow it down in the storm pond. We can soak it in a rain garden, especially one like this that's connected to the street itself. We see a volunteer cleaning up her storm drain, and we can see one of the city's street sweeper trucks that can go out in a targeted way to try and clean up the lakes that are the most vulnerable to that leaf fall, especially this time of year. And there's a picture of someone who didn't do the right thing. They mowed all their grass clippings into the street. That is not what we want to see. That will grow algae. Here's a picture of some lake treatments that we can do. We've been hiring a contractor with the boat there that you can see to do an alum treatment. On the left is Carlson Lake. On the right, I think, is LeMay Lake. We've done a whole bunch of lakes here in town, and those treatments, they should last any place between 5 and 20 years. It really just depends on what kind of inputs they're getting. It's sort of a way to stop the phosphorus input from the sediment, because you apply this stuff and it falls through the water column and it settles into the sediment. So then your main challenge is what is coming in. We know that lake plants are needed to help stabilize the sediment in a lake and, of course, provide good fish habitat and other things. We do have a plant harvester that we run in just a few lakes to help open up some of those areas when the plant levels get a little bit excessive. Then we do some fish stocking, fish surveys, and then winter aeration to help the fish survive over the winter so we can have sort of a more balanced population there. For you specifically, I want to talk about plants, aquatic plants in Egan, and also nitrogen and phosphorus, what they mean and what kind of levels are sort of standard. There's a whole lot of things to know about a lake, but for your group, that's what we'll focus on. Aquatic plants are an important part of a lake because they provide habitat, both for fish to hide in, but also for little invertebrates. Plankton use plants like, that's their main cover, and that's where they live. If you have a lot more plants, you're going to have a lot more places that plankton can live, and overall, it can be a good thing. There are, of course, also sources for herbivores like muskrats, or, there's some duckweed, ducks, waterfowl actually do eat it. Plants stabilize sediment, like I was talking about. They produce oxygen during photosynthesis. They can be a nuisance in excess, and that's a big thing that we have to manage as public expectation in plant growth in Egan. The goal is to have some sort of balance. And then different plants require, different levels of cleanliness in the water. Some plants only grow in super clean lakes. Some plants can grow pretty much anywhere, but all plants need light to survive. There are many aquatic species as well, aquatic invasive species that you would find around town. In the middle here, I've got a picture of purple loosestrife. On the right is curly-leaf pondweed. They are sort of notorious for being invaders in some ways. Here are just a handful of the common aquatic plants that you might see in Egan, and these are either the submerged or the floating ones. This is not even getting into the ones that are along the side of the pond, the terrestrial or the emergent ones. There's a lot of good websites out there that you can look for help if you're trying to identify plants. Like the Minnesota DNR has a good aquatic plant website, and I list a few other resources at the end. So there's coontail, that looks sort of like a raccoon's tail, Canada waterweed, curly-leaf pondweed, Eurasian water milfoil, or hybrid Eurasian water milfoil. There's also water meal that would float, and it feels like cornmeal in your hand. And then there's duckweed, which is a very small plant that floats and has little roots coming off. There are, of course, so many more plants. There's too many to list, but I feel like these are the ones that I see the most as I'm going around throughout the ponds in Egan. The bladderwort, for example, is one that only grows in really clean water. And like I say, if you need help identifying something, you can try and look it up online. You can ask your teachers. Plant diversity is just incredible, and it's one of the most fun things out there, in my opinion. Let's talk about nitrogen and phosphorus. Now, these are two things that are necessary for life. They are incorporated in all the cell processes out there, and they are not necessarily bad chemicals. However, when there are too much of them in the system, either in our area when there's too much phosphorus because leaves and grass clippings and other things wash into the stormwater, or perhaps in an agricultural setting where you have farm fields that are being fertilized with a lot of nitrogen, then that nitrogen can cause problems as well. Phosphorus around here is often the limiting factor for algae growth. It does form sort of the base of a food chain when we're talking about productivity or trophic states. And a lot of times I hear from people that it's all about the lawn fertilizer. And I just want to make it clear that starting in like 2004 in our county, and now I think it's statewide, you're not allowed to just put phosphorus wherever you want. You have to have a soil test showing that your lawn needs it. So I would say runoff is a big problem, and yard waste and all kinds of stormwater inputs, but I wouldn't say that lawn fertilizer is still the biggest problem, if that makes sense. Some sources of phosphorus, for example, in a study from Ramsey, Washington Metro Watershed District, you can see that quite a big chunk is from roads, driveways, and parking lots. And another big chunk is from lawn and landscaped areas. A lot of times we have compacted lawns because when the houses were built, all this machinery drove all over the place and it actually doesn't soak in water super well. So if you want to help improve that soaking in, if you are ever responsible for a lawn, you can aerate it, you can add compost. There's a lot of things that you can do to make that water soak in better. Nitrogen and phosphorus in Egan lakes, for the times that I measure them, which is for probably at least a dozen lakes for twice a month every summer. So the levels of nitrate plus nitrite, which is a standard amount of nitrogen that you might measure, is on the lower side 0.02 milligrams per liter and on the higher side 0.03. And it doesn't sound like a lot. I think around here we have some variation in nitrate, but not a lot. Another thing that we measure is orthophosphate, and you guys might call it phosphate. There might be different levels of this, depending on exactly which test you're doing. Over the years, we've had a lot of trouble comparing our data, so I don't want you to freak out that your data doesn't look exactly like mine. I would say report what you have and talk about where phosphorus comes from in your report, and don't worry too much if it's a lot like mine or not. It will fluctuate a little bit over the season. You'll see more in the water column during the growing season, during the warmer parts of the summer. So you might not see too much this time of year either. If there's the same amount of total phosphorus, but maybe less bioavailable orthophosphorus in that water, that's not unusual. So I might see 6 micrograms per liter, which is 0.006 milligrams per liter, or I might see 289 micrograms per liter, which is 0.289 milligrams per liter. Anyway, there can be quite a big difference in what's good and what's bad. How do you know what's good and what's bad? Minnesota has determined a standard that should be at or below for the average lake levels for the summer. So that's 0.06 milligrams per liter. Or 60 micrograms per liter. If you look back at the previous slide, which I apparently can't do while I'm recording, you would see that that's sort of on the low end of what we see, so it's good to have to shoot for something like that. Many of our lakes can achieve this, but not all. So we are doing some of those things that I talked about for lake management to improve them. Here are some resources. This is my last slide. You can look at the PDF that I'm sending your teachers, or you can pause this show, check out some of these things, and good luck with your project. I don't mind at all. You can certainly send me questions. I have my emails there at the bottom. Hang in there. Good luck. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.